real parents, real stories. It's the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hi there, and welcome to episode 60 of the Meet the Parents podcast, and another half an hour of parent blogger chat. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and tonight I'm joined by John from Dad You Geek. Good evening, John.
Good evening.
So this week we're going to cover a number of topics. We're going to talk about the dangers of sunning ourselves too much, school sports days, and how staying late at work impacts our relationships with our kids. The heatwave of a couple of weeks ago may already seem like a distant memory, but I wonder how many of us did that very British thing of forgetting to put on enough sun cream and ended up with sunburn. More than that, many of us still have what is literally an unhealthy obsession with getting the perfect tan. Now, a poll last week of parents of children aged up to 16, commissioned for the Met Office and NHS England, demonstrated that a lot of parents still hold false beliefs when it comes to understanding the impact that UV rays can have on us. 1 in 3 parents believe that a suntan helps build resistance to the sun, and nearly 4 out of 10 think a tan is a sign of good health. More than half, though, correctly said that they knew that suntans were a symptom of sun damage and best avoided. So, John, did those numbers surprise you at all?
They did really, because I thought every parent now was really conscious around making sure that their kids didn't get any skin damage at all. But then when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, I don't worry so much when I'm in the UK. I worry more when I'm on holiday, which, being a geek and using an app called Dark Sky, I quite often check during the summer months in the UK what the UV index is going to be, mainly from a selfish reason because I haven't got much hair, and it's whether I need to wear sun cream. So yes, in a way, it did surprise me that there was that many that still believed it was good. It's a difficult one. I think we need to be more careful when we're at home, and I think everyone's aware of it when they're travelling, but when you're at home, it's still an issue.
Even on a cloudy day, you can still suffer UV damage, although it's not always the most obvious thing in the world, isn't it?
No, that's it. And I know more than most, really, that on a cloudy day, my head can still burn.
Yeah, it's a painful lesson to learn, isn't it? I know what you mean. I did find it slightly worrying that more than a third of parents think that tans help build resistance to the sun, but I do bet that if they'd run that same poll 30 years ago, the numbers would have been much higher.
That'd have been astronomical, I reckon, yeah.
And I don't know about you, John. I mean, I have to admit that when I was younger, I don't think I was ever really educated properly about the danger of overexposure to the sun. I mean, did you remember being taught about it as a child?
Only from my parents, and that's the thing. So, and again, it was mainly when we went away that we weren't allowed out in the sun. Went on holiday between 12 and 3. So from midday till 3, we had to be doing either a different activity that was in the shade, or we had to be underneath an umbrella, or usually we used to quite often have villas, and we'd go into a villa and we'd have lunch and perhaps some quiet time in the villa. So my dad was absolutely drummed that into us as kids, and that's still has continued into my being a parent, really, myself. There was no education at school or anything, was there? Certainly when I was younger.
Yeah, that's I certainly don't remember anything being taught at school or at preschool or anything like that. And do you think that this is something that's changed? Is it different now for our kids? I mean, I know that our children have been really well drilled in taking sensible precautions ever since they were in nursery, and certainly in a way that I never was.
I think the education's a lot better now. So have you heard of slip, slop, slap? Most people have, and that has usually come out through schools, and everyone knows that you need to do that. You need to slip on a t-shirt, slap on a hat or whatever it is. I can't remember which order it was.
Yeah, it's slip on the shirt, slop on the sunscreen, and
slap on a hat. I remember slap on a hat, again, coming back to my overexposed head, that I haven't always had, and that's only recent. So I got caught out once after I started going for a number one all over, and yeah, I made that mistake once. Never again. I always got a hat with me now. But yeah, I certainly think the kids are so much more aware these days around making sure that they're taking precaution in terms of having sun cream, having a t-shirt, wearing a hat. And they don't mind as much these days, I don't think. I used to hate the fact that I used to have to put a t-shirt on when I was on holiday, or I have to put sun cream on it. It used to really grate on me, but now quite often Katie, the youngest with me, she says, "Dad, don't forget the sun cream," or I want to put some sun cream on. And so we was out today, and she was putting sun cream on the way in the car.
Yeah, your girls are a bit older than my kids. Do you find that their attitude towards developing a tan has that changed at all over the years? Is it something that they're more interested in now? Is it, or are they still careful about how they go out during the summer?
Yeah, see, when I was preparing for this, I was thinking about it because my two daughters are chalk and cheese. So Ashley, the eldest, she just looks at the sun and instantly gets burnt. So she can never get a suntan. She's aware that if she even tries to lay out in the sun, she'll get burnt. So has to have factor 50 and definitely keep out the sun during its peak between 12 and 3. Katie's very lucky in that she very rarely burns. She does go a really nice colour, which, yes, we know that's sun damage, but even continually putting factor 50 on, she still goes a nice colour. Even saying a nice colour is probably wrong now, isn't it? Yeah, I think Ashley still tries to sometimes get a suntan, and I'm more concerned about her than I am Katie, because Ashley's of the age now. She's 21, but she's going on holiday. So she for the last couple of years, she's been going on holiday overseas with her boyfriend a couple of times, 3 times a year. And being the parent, I'm not there to protect her. And luckily she's got burnt once actually. And she sent us pictures and I just thought, oof. But then even when she's been with us and we thought we was protecting her, the last family holiday we had together in Tenerife a few years back, she was just lying underneath an umbrella, literally had a t-shirt over her legs and was wearing a t-shirt, and she still got burnt, and we couldn't work that one out.
You mentioned slip, slop, slap just now, and my wife grew up in Australia, where
that's where it come from, isn't it?
Yeah, obviously that's where the campaign originated, and they're accustomed to having a little bit more sunshine than we are. I remember her talking to me about it, and I've kind of seen how they ran that campaign when it first came out in the early 80s, I think, and it was a pretty typical Aussie campaign, about as subtle as barbed wire wrapped around the brick, but it certainly got the point across. And it's great now that kids here are much more conscious and kind of have that slogan in their heads as well. But it is a bit sad, isn't it, to hear how there's still a minority of parents who are either blissfully unaware or they even actively encourage their children to develop bad habits that put themselves at risk. I mean, 1 in 20 parents in this survey said that they'd allowed their children to use sunbeds, and 7% had encouraged their children to use a lower factor sun cream to help them get a tan. And it seems that some people never learn. 17% of parents with under 11, so that's 1 in 6, said their kids had experienced painful sunburn 4 or more times in the past 2 years, and 4% of parents said a child had been sunburned so severely that they'd had to be admitted to hospitals. That's really quite frightening, isn't it?
That really is, yeah. I'm absolutely flabbergasted that people would actually encourage their children to use sunbeds. The thing that stood out there for me is this 7% had encouraged children to use a lower SPF to get a tan. I often remember, and I think we still do sometimes, is the later you get into the holiday, the lower SPF you use. So, and that's probably wrong. You should just continue using 50 throughout. But I do know people, and I know we have in the past, have started off for the first week, say, using factor 50 and then gone down to factor 30.
Yeah, I remember that. That used to be almost common accepted practice, didn't it?
Yeah. You think about it logically, it's bonkers. The sun's just not got any weaker, and your skin's not got any stronger as a result of you being in the sun.
I completely get that sometimes you allow your kids to get, or yourselves to get sun damage accidentally. You know, maybe you've forgotten sun cream, or you've just not been aware how strong the sun is. But, you know, some people almost actively take steps that put themselves at risk. Is, you know, that's, in this day and age, I think, particularly where education is so much better, it's a real shame when people do that.
Yeah, it's a shame not more places have got the cameras that show you the damage to your skin.
Yeah, I saw this quote from a spokesman for the NHS who said it's important that parents take extra care to protect babies and children. You know, their skin is much more sensitive than adult skin, and damage caused by repeated exposure to UV could lead to skin cancer developing in later life. And, you know, I'm reminded very much of my wife's grandmother. You know, she grew up in Australia, lived her whole life there, and in later life, you know, suffered a lot from, you know, melanoma and all kinds of, you know, skin conditions as well. So, you know, she was in every other respect, an incredibly active, lively, healthy woman, but, you know, she was living proof of the damage that not taking care of your skin can cause. It does seem a bit odd, doesn't it? You know, given how much we care about things like, I don't know, you know, road and internet safety, it does seem a little bit odd that we allow our kids to put themselves at risk over something as simple and easily preventable as sun damage.
Yeah.
Anyhow, summer will soon be over anyway, won't it? And we can go back to complaining about how cold it is. I read an article online the other day that reminded me of a post I wrote nearly 7 years ago about the different types of dad who show up at nursery or school sports days. So in that post I suggested there were 3 types of sports day dad: competitive dad, can't be bothered dad, and competitive dad masquerading as can't be bothered dad. Now, I'm more laid back these days, but up until recently I was very much the last type. In superhero terms, I was Dr. Bruce Banner until I got to the start line, and then I turned into that big green fella. Even though my current physique isn't really conducive to running anything more strenuous than a bath. I've missed a fair few in my time, but I do try to attend our kids' sports days when I can. And John, how about you?
Obviously, Ashley's no longer at school. She's fully working. Casey's in senior school now. But when they were in primary school, I always used to try and attend the sports days, because the primary school they used to go used to do a really nice. It was a sports day, well, a sports morning, and they'd have sport, and then you were invited to come and have a picnic on the field with the kids for lunch. Yeah, I used to try and attend, but I would. The dad's races.
So did you ever get competitive about them?
I was very much the can't be bothered dad, but actually secretly masquerading as, yeah, I want to win this. But I never took part. I always thought I've never been an athlete, not a runner, nothing at all. Put me in a swimming pool, and I would have been first in line for the race. But for running, no, I always shied away and thought, no, I'm not getting involved. And being a school governor for most of the time, I just used to pull. Oh, it's not appropriate for a governor to take part in a school in a parents' race.
Oh, that's a nice excuse to have.
It was a very nice, and it's an excuse I still have at the same, because I'm still a governor at Katie's old school. So yeah, unfortunately I don't get to go to sports days anymore. Yeah,
sports days are this strange thing, aren't they? They you only seem to get one extreme of weather or the other. Either it's the hottest day of the year, or I'd say it's the heavens open, it chucks it down with rain, and they get cancelled.
Yeah, and that's why I'm not a teacher, because I'd still make them do it.
Oh, dear. Anyhow, this article I read suggested that there are 8 types of parents you'll meet at sports day, rather than my 3. That's inflation for you. So namely, number 1, the former athlete. Number 2, the lycra imposter. So these are typically mums who dress immaculately in branded head-to-toe activewear, but wouldn't ever dream of doing anything even remotely active in it. Number 3, the serious trainer. So these are the parents who train for months in advance just to make sure that they do win. Number 4, the too cool for school sports day. So that's typically a hipster type in imported £150 trainers. Number 5, the young enough to be your son/daughter. Number 6, the vicarious competitor. If you can't beat them, make sure your child can. So I always envisage this as being the sort of parent who will order their kids out on training runs on a wet Sunday afternoon just because. Number 7, the vocalizer, quite closely linked to number 6. But this is the parent who sounds like they're shouting through a megaphone, but actually they're just shouting. And finally, number 8, the very important career person. So this is the parent who turns up at sports day but is too busy on their mobile to actually watch or encourage their child. So do you recognise any of those types, John? And would you categorise you or your wife as any of these?
Right, okay. I recognise all of the above, and it's quite funny. And preparing for this, I actually laughed out loud reading this list going, oh God, and then visualising some of my friends. So any of them that listen to the podcast come up and ask me which one I think you are, and I'm happy to tell you. Especially number 7, the vocalizer. If you don't know who you are, then it's probably you. But yeah, where would I put myself? To my guilt, sometimes the very important career person, because quite often I'd fit the sports day in around meetings and quite often rock up in a suit and constantly feeling guilty that I'm skiving in inverted commas off work. That's it. I'm not going to put the wife into a category. For the sake of our marriage, I'm not putting her into a category.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably most of us can associate each of those types with someone we know. I think they're pretty universal, aren't they?
Yeah. I did actually, though, see a guy once run the dad's race in a pair of brogues and rolled up chinos. And I took my hat off to him. I was just like, fair play. And he didn't lose either, and he didn't fall over.
Going back to our previous discussion about you being a school governor, I do think that there is an additional subcategory of parents who are pretending to be very important career people just so that they have a ready-made excuse for not participating in the dad's race, because they just need to take this ever so conveniently timed urgent call. Not that I've ever resorted to that as an excuse. Oh no, not me. For our last topic this week, we've talked previously about research into working parents carried out by the charity Working Families and childcare group Bright Horizons, and they released another report recently looking into the impact of parents who get stuck in late working hours. So according to their latest survey, 3 out of 5 working parents regularly miss their children's bedtimes because of work, and about 2 out of 5 do extra hours in the evenings or weekends. Now that's really quite a scary proportion when you think about it. Now, yeah, both John and I are full-time working parents, so yeah, this is something that has been a bit of a constant battle for both of us. Now, apparently the average full-time worker in the UK works around 37 hours a week, although for many of us that number is far higher. But yeah, no, that number's pretty much middle of the pack amongst EU countries. The Greeks, for instance, work on average something like 42 hours a week, while the Germans are right at the other end, averaging 35 hours a week. That's Teutonic efficiency for you, I guess. John, I guess it's less of an issue now that you've got one grown-up daughter and a teen, but being late home from work and missing kids' bedtimes that's been something you've had to deal with in the past, hasn't it?
It is, yeah. And to be honest, that's the first form of parent guilt that I ever felt, was actually that absence and not being there for home for bedtime, for the bedtime read, or even just help out with the bedtime bath and things like that. And it puts a lot of pressure on the other parent in the relationship. Even though, and she's going to hate me for saying this, so Katie, Ashley it's not uncommon for me not to see her. She stays over her boyfriend's quite often, and sometimes I forget she's even here because she's so quiet when she's here. She likes her own space. But for Katie, I still have to tuck her into bed over night time. She still wants me to say goodnight to her, and I still get that guilt. Having to go away makes it difficult as well for work. So
yeah, because you travel a fair amount, don't you? And I mean, what's the kind of feeling there? Is it relief? Is it guilt? Is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, if I'm honest, it's a bit of both sometimes, because every parent will know what it's like, and some more than others. I'm quite lucky that I've got a good age gap between my kids. But if you've got a load of kids under all of primary school age, it's draining. It's mentally and physically draining. So for me to be able to go away and, okay, it's longer working hours because it's not as glamorous as a lot of people think that you get to stay in some nice hotels. You quite often find yourself, you're stuck in a room, sat in front of your computer doing some work or catching up on some work. But that guilt does creep in, and you're not there to say goodnight to them. But technology's helped with that, to be honest. I always FaceTime or speak to Katie and Mel, my wife, before bedtime, regardless of what I'm doing. I always try and take that time, just take 10 minutes out of an evening, especially if you're out socialising with colleagues or clients and things like that, to take time out and actually just say goodnight to them is what they need.
Technology does make life a lot easier now. I mean, you can FaceTime. I do the same thing, or even just giving them a call. I mean, that's something that in the past, making an international call home, say, or a long distance call from somewhere else in the country was not something that was as straightforward or inexpensive as it now is, but it's definitely much easier now. And as you say, just trying to find 10 minutes out of your evening to be able to do that is, it is really important, isn't it?
It is, and it's one area I won't compromise on with work. If I'm staying away from work, it's because I'm doing that to help my employer. But for me, family, I always try to put the family first, and I know sometimes that's really difficult. And again, that other parent guilt creeps in when you have to rely on other family members to pick up some of that slack because you're either travelling or something like that. But it's a written rule for me that I'm going to disappear for 15 minutes of an evening because I'm about to go make a phone call.
Looking at me, I'm quite lucky, I think. I average around 45 hours a week, and some weeks, if I'm very busy or travelling, I can work a lot longer hours than that, and occasionally that means evenings and weekends as well. But I do try to keep work out of the house as much as I can. I mean, most evenings I'm home just before 7, so I may only get half an hour or so with the kids, but I do make an effort to get home in time for bedtime. Even if that means that I spend an hour doing emails or whatever later on. I get in fairly early in the morning, and I rarely take more than 10 or 15 minutes for lunch, which isn't the healthiest thing in the world, but that's the trade-off I make to get myself home early. And I probably only miss bedtime a couple of times a month, and that's, like with you, that's really important to me. It's one of the reasons that I've avoided looking at jobs that require a large amount of travel. So, either way, I seem to be able to make it work for me at least, 90% of the time, I guess.
Yeah, fortunately, I changed jobs in January. The downside to that at the moment is because we're a small business and we've really got an aggressive growth strategy over the next few years. The travel for me at the moment is creeping up. I try to only go away for one night at a time, but certainly during this month of July, that's gonna creep up significantly, and there's potentially 1 week this month where I'm going to be away for 3 nights on the trot.
And I guess it's one of those things where your attitude perhaps changes a little bit as your kids get a little bit older and more independent and self-sufficient. I mean, I'm certainly finding now that, our kids are much younger than yours. I mean, they're aged between 5 and 9, but my attitude towards them in terms of willingness to travel and even just the logistics of putting them to bed, although it's not easy putting 3 primary school age children to bed by any means, it's a lot easier than when they were, 5, 3 and 1, for instance.
If I'm honest, I don't know how you do it. I really don't. I've only ever experienced parenting with a 9-year age gap.
I mean, John, in addition to travel, do you find that you work from home much, or sometimes maybe adopt slightly more flexible hours so that, if you did want to attend, say, a sports day or a parents' evening or something like that, that you're able to fit your work around it? Yeah,
see, this is where I'm really fortunate in the career that I've got, that I work in sales. I'm home based, and I have been for 10 plus years in the jobs I've had. So I work from home. If I'm not, on occasion have to go to the office, which for me, I've got 2 kind of main offices, one in Birmingham, one in Gloucester, and I live in Essex. So I'm not in the office every day. I'm out meeting clients, which is the main part of my job. So I control my own diary. I control the days. I control where I go, where I work. So I'm very lucky in that regard, and can make my diary fit around that, and try to have 1 day a week where I work from home. So I am very lucky that I can make the diary work for me. And certainly with Katie starting at senior school, it's helped that I mostly, I'm not tomorrow, but mostly do the school run in the morning. And I love that time because we have a chat if she's in the mood. But yeah, I am very lucky that being home based, I feel very grateful for the flexibility my job gives me. And
yeah, and having that flexibility makes you more willing to to accommodate those periods when you do have longer working hours or when you're travelling, don't they? It's
exactly, and it's a trade-off. It really is a trade-off, and I've yet to not find a company who aren't happy with the fact that they understand sometimes I might take a 2-hour lunch break so I can go to a sports day, whereas they then understand that I might leave the house some mornings at 6 o'clock and not get back home till gone 8. So I think it's a happy medium that we reach.
Do you think that companies these days are making an effort to be more flexible with whether it's home-based staff or even office-based ones? Do you think they're more accommodating now of people trying to have more flexible work styles and working hours? And do you think it's different for dads to how it is for mums?
Yes, I do. Well, actually, I think it really depends on the company you work for. I'd certainly say some of the what I call city-based companies. I think a lot of the city companies, some are stuck in the Stone Age. Some really don't get that their employees have got families and have got a life outside of work, and they expect everyone in at 7 and everyone to leave at 7. So I think there's some that are still struggling, but some really have cottoned onto the fact that you don't need to have your employees in the office every day to get the best out of them. And it's the ones that are starting to make that change and have that more flexibility. So I don't know if you know, but some offices are moving away from fixed desks. So you have hot desks, but what that means is that 3 of the 5 working days in the week, your employees will work from home. And those that are understanding that, I think, are starting to see that if they invest that time in giving the employees some more flexibility and treating them as adults, as everyone is, most people are in their job because it's something they enjoy doing. But if you invest that time in your employees and having those kind of relationships where you give them a little bit of flexibility, they will start to see the greater returns coming back the other way from their employees.
Yeah, and it's moving away from the kind of old-fashioned culture of presenteeism, isn't it? Where you have to be seen to have to be in the office, to have your jacket on the back of your chair, and to actually physically be there, and actually as you say, treating employees as adults and not feeling that they have to be there where you can keep an eye on them, that they can be more productive working slightly different hours around childcare or working from home or wherever.
And I completely get in some jobs it's not possible. If you work in the emergency services, you can't just have your policeman wandering off during the day or your nurses just going, I'll be back in a couple of hours. I completely get that. But I think in the main, companies, if they start to embrace this change, it'll benefit everybody as a whole.
I think you're right. I think, obviously some companies are more progressive than others, but overall I think workplaces are offering much more flexibility than ever before, whether it's part-time working, flexible hours, flexi days, shared parental leave, all this kind of stuff. And certainly the world of work is much less rigid, I would say, than it was when I started out 20 odd years ago. Although and this is something we have touched on in the podcast before, it is often something that is different for men than it is for women. I know of hardly any guys who work less than a 5-day week, and while it's not unusual now to see a mum coming and going in line with school run hours, say, it's not something you often see with dads. And I do feel that, again, depends on the company. You often get situations where dads feel almost more of a pressure or a need to explain why it is that they're leaving the office at 2:30 to say, go to see a nativity play, in a way that wouldn't even raise an eyebrow in the case of mums. But that's not to complain. Attitudes and laws relating to working dads have changed far more in the past 20 years than they did in the previous 200. So things, I think, are heading very much in the right direction. Now we just need to focus a little bit more on finding that ever-elusive work-life balance, although that's something that affects everyone really, not just parents or dads. It's something that affects anyone who's working.
And it is, and there's some companies out there that I'm fascinated with, and they seem to have it sussed in the way they operate. One of them that I was looking at is Buffer, and you're probably aware of what Buffer is. And they're a completely mobile workforce, so they have employees all over the world, but are completely mobile, don't have offices apart from I think one central office in America somewhere, and the flexibility that must bring must be amazing.
Yeah, and increasingly I think we will see more and more companies, particularly in areas like the tech sector, who work like that. So, so that's something for us all to look forward to. So before we go, John, what have you been up to recently?
Apart from working a lot and travelling lots, well, I was in London, so living so close to London and being born and bred in London, I very rarely get to do the more recent touristy things. And on Friday, I actually got to go up the Sky Garden, which is a building number 10 Fenchurch Street, and it was absolutely amazing building and amazing views over London. So much so I really want to go back now. And I unfortunately didn't get to go out in the outside bit because it was too late at night because we went on a Friday. Certainly one I want to go back to, and now makes me more than ever want to go up the Shard. And there's a few other buildings, the Heron Tower. It's got a nice restaurant in there. I want to go back to London and do some of that touristy bits that I seem to be missing out on.
That's the same for many of us who either live or grew up in London. I'm certainly the same. I've only really experienced London as a tourist when I'm showing other people around. As for us, we had our school summer fete over the weekend, which basically means spending a load of money to buy a sack full of Haribo, half of which you donated to the event anyway. But the kids love all the classic simple stuff, bouncy castles, simple games of skill involving throwing and shooting stuff, what's not to like.
And don't forget, it all goes back to a really good cause, the school.
Oh yeah, absolutely. At our summer fete this year, they had a Wild West theme, so they even had a bucking bronco, which the kids adored, and Cara, despite being the smallest of our three, proved particularly adept at. So a good afternoon was had by all.
I feel it, Daddy, I want a horse.
Yeah, I'm not even entertaining that discussion at the moment. And that's it for this episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the two of us online. John?
I'm at dadyougeek.co.uk for the blog, if you can call it that these days, and dadyougeek on all social media platforms.
And you can find me at slouchingtowardsthatcham.com and across most social media as @ThatchamDad. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. You can also follow us on Twitter at ParentsPodcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So thanks for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.